one of the sections in the T, it says like just use one of the files from Ruby, like one of the basic exercises we did, and it says to create a folder called project, and then project spec folder.
Hmm.
If I did that in the Vagrant machine, but I didn't set up like a whole Rails, it just said,
Yeah, this is not involving Rails.
yeah. Well, when I try and install the gem RSpec for it, it keeps on like not working.
I would try to make sure that you're in your Vagrant box, because if you are in your Vagrant box, it should work. The
Okay.
other thing that could be happening is that you are not. The Vagrant box got disconnected from the internet somehow. That can happen.
Okay.
And then in that case, you just have to Vagrant halt to stop it, and then restart it with Vagrant up. And
Okay.
that could also be what could be causing the issue.
Okay. I'll
Okay.
try that.
Yeah. But regardless, let's start off with the discussion. So first question: what is test-driven development? How can it make developers more efficient? What do you guys think? Yeah.
So let's say you're a developer creating like one part of an application. Um, you can test to see if that part will affect parts of the other parts of the project, and create bugs that you want to proceed before um, basically integrating it into the project.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Brandon. So just to reiterate for those who are listening on the video, basically test-driven development, why it makes developers more efficient is that it allows somebody to test if they change a certain part of their application, does that change kind of break anything else that was kind of unforeseen, right? And because it's all automated, that's kind of the biggest thing about TDD is that it's all automated. Um, then you can kind of catch those mistakes without having to wait for somebody to discover them themselves, right? So an example would be like, let's say I added a new functionality to my application, but what happens is like I added a edit to edit some property of the user. But when I try to view that property of the user, it causes something to break, right? And if you had TDD, you'd know that it would break because the test would go through and check all the pages for you every time you made a change. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing. So you could see how it could be nice. What is test-driven development in general? So test-driven development in general is just this idea of creating testing files that go through and run your code for you and have certain expectations of what the code should give back, right? So like if you're testing a math function, then you would say like, expect math.add 1 and 2 to equal 3. And if it didn't equal 3, then you knew that you broke something in your code, okay? Cool. So what is RSpec? How do we use it? Anybody want to take a crack at that one? Yeah.
It's like software that does that for you. I think it's a gem.
Yeah, exactly. It's a gem that allows us to create automated tests. And how do we use it? Well, we're going to use it using the RSpec command in our terminal. So once we install the gem RSpec, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to say RSpec and then the name of the testing file, and it'll go through and run all the tests in that file and tell us which test we passed, which one we failed. Okay, so that's kind of the general kind of workflow using RSpec. Okay, number 3 is kind of a doozy. So comment the following code, describe buyer do. So would anyone like to take a crack at this one before I kind of go through this one step by step? Okay, that's fine. So for the first part, the first line of code on that file is rspec.describe buyer do, right? And basically all this is doing is it creates a block that is known as a describe block, okay? And what this is saying is we're gonna describe the behavior of this buyer class, okay? So you can assume that somewhere up above there was some sort of buyer class that was defined or imported into the file. And basically from that do to the final end at the end of this little question, that is supposed to be designed to describe the buyer class on its own. Okay? So let's talk about this. Before each do, at buyer equals buyer.new. So for this one, what do you think at buyer is going to be? It's an instance, right? It's an instance of the buyer class. And why do we put the at in front of it? Well, the at is important because
Center? Center?
it's not necessarily that, I mean, we're setting a variable, right? But think of it like almost like an attribute, right? And why we use it like an attribute, why we write that at syntax is because without it, how are variables in Ruby scoped to the block of code? So if I didn't put the at in front, then the buyer variable would only be defined within the do and the end of the before each, right?
So
Not outside of it. But then now that we added the at in front of it, we can access it through the rest of our tests, okay? Now, why is this necessary? Well, if you think about it, if we didn't have that line, these lines of code, then that means before every test, we would have to have this repetitive piece of code, buyer equals buyer.new, buyer equals buyer.new, buyer equals buyer.new, right? So to kind of save that space, kind of refactor our code, we're allowed to, within RSpec, to kind of create instances of these objects and do anything else really within these before blocks, okay? Awesome. So context has money do. So what is this context has money? So anybody want to take a crack at that one? So a context block in an RSpec test, right? It basically just describes the particular part of the behavior of the buyer class that you're trying to sort of test, right? These are all tools for the testers to kind of organize the tests that they write. It doesn't really affect how the tests are run per se, but they're there to kind of say, okay, if I fail a test within here, that means that I failed something regarding the money functionality of this class, okay? So what we're gonna do is inside of this context, we're gonna say before each do, at buyer.money equals 10 and end. So before each of these has money tests, which there's only one, we're gonna get basically the buyer to have a money of 10, okay? Now, the first test that we're actually going to write, and this is probably the most important piece, is the it can buy a soda do, and then underneath it says expect at buy soda to equal true and end, right? So let's break this one down kind of piece by piece. I might even go on the board and show it. So So this is called an RSpec expectation. Now, this expectation, it's a function, right? And what does this function take in? it takes in some code statement, right? So what is the statement of code doing? It says go to the buyer object, run its buy soda function. .to, that's just kind of saying, you know, I expect this thing to here, and then this is equals, and then this is the return result of this guy. Okay? So basically what this block of code, if you read it out, it also does kind of make sense as a sentence too. Expect that piece of code at buyer.buySoda to return me, right, the Boolean true. So to equal says I want it to be returning me this exact same sort of value in Ruby. Okay? So that means that when I design the buyer class, the buySoda function should return true if I have enough money, right? That's kind of the idea there. Okay? And that is the it can buy soda. Do, that whole block is called an it block. And an it block can contain multiple expectations. But for the most part, it tends to be just probably just like one expectation. Okay? So if I fail this test, I'm going to fail the entire it can buy soda. Okay?
What would not be an if? I'm just curious, because it's a Boolean, right? So
Essentially how RSpec does it is it probably has some ifs and stuff inside of its inside of the RSpec's definition of the expect function, right? But the thing is, this is just RSpec's syntax, right? We're letting RSpec do all the heavy lifting, so we kind of have to use RSpec's library of functions. Under the hood, they probably do use ifs and stuff like that, other conditionals. Okay. All right. So now that we've talked about the end of the has money context, we can move on to the next context that says doesn't have money. So here we're going to describe what happens when the buyer does not have money. So and then you could see that the it block underneath says it can't buy a soda. Do expect at buyer.buySoda to equal false. So again, to follow that sort of similar format, we're expecting the returned value from at buyer.buySoda to be false. And if we designed our class properly, it should. Okay? And that kind of wraps up a very, very basic testing file. All right? So try to get used to this format. In the beginning, what they'll do is they will tell you to write the tests for existing classes that you've done. And that's just to sort of familiarize you with this sort of syntax here. Okay? Later on, they might do the opposite. They might say, here's a testing file. Write the code that fulfills these tests. And in my experience, that's the way that most companies will do it, right? It's not that you're not the one typically writing the tests, especially in the beginning. It's more like they give you the tests and they tell you to write code that fulfills it. That way they don't need to like pour through and run your code all the time. They can just run the test. If it passes, good, you did well, right? So the last question is a little open-ended, but it's pretty important with regards to sort of how students tend to view some of the assignments and how to complete them. So let's go over that one. So suppose that you are a developer using TDD and your code is printing hello world. Instead of the test expectation of hello world, is printing hello world with the exclamation point instead of the test expectation of capital hello capital world. Which of the two files, the testing file or the actual code being tested, should you edit to fix this? Yeah, Alejandro? The code being tested, right? So let's imagine you're on like some big development team and they say, you know, hey, we have this testing file. It would be a big boo-boo to say, oh, my code didn't pass the test. I'm just going to change the testing file so I pass, right? And it might seem, you know, for some of you might seem rather obvious right now, but when you're in your assignments and they give you a test file, a testing file, and they tell you to write the code that fulfills the test, very often I'll see students change the testing file so that whatever they wrote matches, right? So try to resist that temptation as much as possible, okay? Yeah,
So change code to testing, not the testing file.
exactly. So, yeah. And it'll be pretty easy to tell which one is which because the test files, the ones that contain the tests themselves, always end in _spec. That's the naming convention. Cool. So on that level, is everybody cool with this sort of section on testing? Okay. So I didn't want to take up too much of you guys' time because I wanted you guys to spend some time on the controllers and views section. I know that a lot of you guys are catching up on it. I think in terms of what we wanted to do for the activity today, I'm kind of going to scale it back a little bit because that one is a little more advanced, and I think that one might be better to do maybe later on next week. But for now, what I want to do is I want everybody to do at 3 to pair program Dojo dashboard. So let me see if I can connect to the TV here. But Dojo dashboard is the assignment after Ninja Gold. I don't think anybody has finished it yet. So if you are about to do Dojo dashboard, then I would recommend moving on to TDD until 3. Okay? And then at 3, we're going to do Dojo dashboard together. Let me stop the video so it doesn't break when I change the display.